Hey, everybody. Hope everything's going well. I just wanted to share my last few thoughts on this month's topic of intimacy. And I have a few questions that I pulled from the Facebook group, and I had a couple other thoughts that I wanted to share. And then if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them in posts or in other videos. But figured we just jump in today with the last few things here. Okay, so one of the things that there were questions about was about like sexual anorexia. So I thought I could address maybe what it looks like for both people and why that might be the case and what you can do about it. So the first thing I was thinking about was when sometimes the wives struggle when their husbands don't want to have sex because it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. And so part of what's important to understand is that when these moments of the case when the husband isn't feeling like being intimate, oftentimes it's because there's a block to that, which for many people it's either like depression or anxiety or shame, and those all kind of overlap with each other. But usually when people are overwhelmed in those situations, sometimes people use sex as a way to numb out depression and anxiety and shame. Other times it's a block. And so I can see how in these particular situations it would trigger the wife to feel maybe not enough or her own sense of loss or longing, especially if that's an important part of the relationship for her, assuming they've done repair work, because it's often difficult for the wives to want to be intimate without having repair work done. And so oftentimes when there are these disconnects like this, like I said, it's because of these underlying concerns. And it's important, I think, to just put, if you've watched the other couple of videos, we want to just put the depression or anxiety or shame into that figure eight dance of distress process. And the goal first isn't to repair the sexual relationship. I think a disconnected sexual relationship is just a symptom of relationship disconnection generally. And so I think it's important, usually when I work with people, I try to figure out what's at the core. So when they don't want to be intimate, we spend a little time digging what's underneath that. They could get to depression, anxiety, or shame. Then we just explore that. So what's the depression around? Is the depression around a sense of hopelessness that they can't stop acting out? Or is it around a sense of sadness knowing that they've caused you pain? Or their own individual shame or feelings of worthlessness or low self-esteem? So you try to just isolate what part they're struggling with specifically, or what's the block to intimacy. And the more concrete you make it, the more actionable steps follow to resolve it. Because if it's too broad and you just hear him say, I don't want to be intimate, I'm sorry, then like, what do you do? What are you supposed to do with that? But if we can dig into that, okay, what might be contributing to that? When have you felt like that for a long time? If so, like how long? What was the beginning of this? What was the scenario or the circumstance in which that began? And then you just kind of ask these questions to explore what's underneath the surface. And I think the same can be done. It doesn't have to be done in therapy. It can be easier to have some outside help doing it. But I think the principle is you're trying to get to what's underneath these blocks, which then once you understand specifically for him, his depression or anxiety is centered around this thing, then you can resolve that because you know why he's struggling. So if it's any one of those things that I mentioned, you then just, whether it's like I said, any one of those things, then the natural result or the next step is whatever he might need. If he's sad because he can't stop acting out, then taking appropriate steps to be able to help him get the support. So what kind of support does he need? And the more he's able to get support and find sobriety and figure out even what's underneath that, right? I just think I'm sad because I can't stop acting out. Okay, well, what's underneath that? Why is the acting out continuing to happen? It might be just emotional mismanagement, that he's not learning how to deal with his pain in a healthy way, which is a big part of what we've been talking about throughout this course, or these last couple of lectures, or like little, as I share these thoughts. We want to take that pain that he's feeling and have him learn how to bring that to you. Because the more he can share, the more he's able to let you in. Not only do you feel less alone, but he's also getting the support that he needs in terms of being able to share and let his feelings out, which helps to process them differently, which then in a positive way impacts the depression. So it reduces it or eliminates it the more he does this and gets the support that he needs. So I think that's with regard to him. with regard to her, so for you ladies, when there is a disconnect there, and a couple of comments were that drive isn't there at all, but they want it to be there, or for some people, it's the drive's not there, and I'm not in that place. I don't want to have that kind of relationship with him right now. And so I think the process is similar, right? We're all born with the drive, and if you don't feel like you have it right now, there's nothing wrong with you. It just is an indicator that something's blocking it for you as well. And most of the time, it's trauma, and or he's not safe. And so when those two things are out of balance, or in other words, when those two things are still blocking if they're not resolved, rather. So when those two things aren't resolved, then you're going to have a natural symptom of that, which is a decrease in desire to be intimate. So the same process exists for you, right? You try to tap into what specifically is it for you? What blocks it? Is it trauma? Is it unresolved hurt? Do you still feel disconnected? Do you feel like there's damage that hasn't been, there's no resolution? Or if he's not creating safety for you, if he's not listening and empathizing and validating, you're likely not going to have a strong desire to be intimate. And I think that's natural. So the goal isn't to start with intimacy. The goal is to start to repair whatever the blocks are, get those out of the way. Then it's a natural, intimacy is a natural result of feeling connected, of feeling safe. And trying to examine what the block is for you will then give you the steps that you need to be able to move forward and get the support and healing that you need. And so whether it's trauma, and if it's that, again, those steps are natural in terms of repairing, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, how to repair. And number two, if it is his lack of safety, again, you can put that into that same figure eight pattern, right? Underneath the surface, you might feel disconnected and afraid and alone if he's not present for you. So being able to share that with him and say, hey, listen, this is a part of this relationship I want to be able to repair if this is true for you. Some people don't want to repair it right now, which is fine, but some of the women that commented do. So if it's, hey, this is an important part of our relationship, and I want to be able to experience this with you, intimacy with you, but when there isn't safety, if I feel like I share and you're not hearing me, or if I feel disconnected and lonely, it's much more harder, it's much more difficult for me to have the desire to be intimate. And so if you're able to start to share, I don't feel safe quite yet, and then you can share, this is what I need. I need to see X, Y, and Z from you. I just need to feel like you're listening to me, or that you're continuing to stay consistent with your recovery work. Doing those things can help give him feedback as to how to help create safety, so that can be the result, that you guys can be intimate. Because oftentimes, so this is another thing that I was thinking about, the guys usually turn to sex for connection and or to just cope with pain. And there's nothing wrong with them for doing that. It just often doesn't work. So if he's turning to you for sex to be able to connect and feel close to you, that's fine. But if you're not in a place to receive that, then it doesn't work. And then that dance of distress, that figure eight cycle, can get sparked up around that. And so if this is a part of how he wants to connect with you, all we want to do is get the sequencing right. Or in other words, we want him to create safety, to be emotionally connected, and then, again, intimacy is a natural result of that. And so I think there's different pieces in all of this, but the more you can explore, I guess the rule of thumb to summarize all of this is to figure out what the block is specifically for you, and then try to drill down into that and make it concrete so you can tell your partner what the block is. Again, if it's like an emotional disconnect for you, well, what specifically is it? What triggers that lack of safety, or what triggers the pain that would make you not want to be intimate? The more you can get in touch with that and share it with him, if he's in a place to receive this, then he can support you and help work through that block with you. Because again, the fastest way for us to be able to move through these blocks is with the person who caused the hurt, because they've got this influence to be able to heal the hurt. And sometimes in some relationships, the other person, let's say the husband, he doesn't know how to do it, then the goal is to help him learn how to do that. And I think the distinguishing factor in your ability to be able to share with your husband isn't if he doesn't know how to do it, because he can learn. That's, again, the whole purpose of these talks, these discussions that I'm sharing with you over the last few times. The whole purpose is to help give him direction as to how to learn how to do it, because most of the time they don't know how to do it. And so it's not that there's something broken inside of them. It's just, okay, you don't have that skill yet. So this is the path. These are the steps. This is what you focus on. This is how to get that result. So I think trying, if he's willing. But there are some situations where you ladies might be with somebody who's not interested in trying. And then if that's the case, sharing wouldn't do all that much good if he refuses. So again, there's, I think, a fine line between that as well, because sometimes there's like resistance, which can be perceived as he doesn't want to, he's refusing. But sometimes that resistance is just fear, which again can lead us back to the same theme that we've been on. If we can help him get in touch with that fear and share that with you, then a whole nother set of solutions open up, and he's able to start to learn how to manage his fear with you. And so I think, again, it's a fine line between resistance and an inability to know how to do it versus a refusal. And a lot of times you can feel that, right? If you're with somebody who just refuses to do any recovery work, who's just not in recovery at all, that's pretty clear that sharing might not be all that helpful. It usually isn't until they're in a place where they can receive it. So those are just a couple thoughts on the anorexia piece. Is there anything else I want to... One last thing, I have notes on my phone here. One last thing I was thinking about is a part of why, we touched on this in the first lesson, but a part of why the guys can overemphasize intimacy is because that's the only way that they've known how to connect in the past. And it's tricky because that is often the only strategy or tool that they have to cope with their emotions as well. So you've got like two, they kind of are in a similar vein, but you have these two different motivations for intimacy. Number one is to just cope with pain and distract and avoid and escape. And number two, intimacy can be used as a way to connect and to recharge and to feel close and to strengthen the relationship. But it's hard because if it's the same strategy, if it's just sex, it's hard. It might be hard to know what motivation it's coming from. This is a part of why doing the emotional work first can set the course correctly. Because if you're emotionally connected, then again, intimacy is a natural result or one of the next steps for people when they're safety for them to move into physical intimacy because they have emotional intimacy. And so being able to focus on that piece first is important, because if they're using sex as a way to distract from pain and numb their emotions, again, it's the strategy that they've learned. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just we want to incorporate new strategies, which specifically involve, again, going with the theme, sharing with you. The more they can open up and share their pain instead of cope with it through this behavior, the better off that they're going to be and the closer you're going to feel, because you're going to start to feel let in. And the more let in you feel, the safer it's going to create more safety. There's one other thing that I was thinking about. I was working with a couple and I had a thought that I'd never had before, which was when acting out happens, there has to be compartmentalization. And so this supports this idea of how important it is to share, because if the husband isn't sharing his feelings, he's compartmentalizing them and putting them in like a box somewhere and like on a shelf. So those emotions are unprocessed and they're on a shelf, which can then drive them to want to numb out because they're painful. And even if they're not in the forefront of his mind, they're still that pain is still operating in the background. And so they have to compartmentalize. And so often is when they stop compartmentalizing and open up and explore their full range of emotions and share with you, then again, the addiction there's no place for it, because addictions thrive off of compartmentalization. And the more disconnected somebody is within themselves, that's like fertile ground for an addiction, because the more hurt I am, the more I turn to this behavior or substance to numb it. And then that creates more hurt, which then I keep numbing it. But the more you create that back and forth, the stronger that gets. And so by him taking that pain to you and not compartmentalizing anymore, then he's able to manage his emotions. You're able to feel safer. And I think that's a better measuring stick of his recovery work isn't the numbers on his sobriety counter, because he can be compartmentalizing, which again reinforces the importance of that emotional connection. Because the more connected he is with you, the safer that can create. Like, the addiction has less of a pull when he's not compartmentalizing anymore. I hope that makes sense. So, okay, the next piece. Okay, so I want to get into this this repair piece. I have this little concept. I'm pretty visual, so I want to just draw something up for you so I can show you more visually what I mean and walk you through the repair process. Because so often what happens for people is that without repairing old hurts, we're so much more sensitive to pain in the present or situations in the present because it just triggers old hurts. And so I want to share with you the way that that couples can work through the process of old hurts so they don't keep coming back in the present. Oftentimes it's one of the main complaints of the husband is that, like, oh, she doesn't let anything go. This happened 5 years ago, but I still hear about today. Like, she'll never get over this stuff. And there's a reason why that's the case for people. The reason why we keep bringing up pain over and over again is because it's not resolved. We don't have there's no comfort or reassurance, and we're not able to maybe make sense of those old situations. So they still trigger fear in the present. And so I want to share with you here the process of repair. Okay, so there's this parallel track where, okay, here we go. People have these discussions. Okay, I guess this is kind of how I visualize it, right? You're talking above the surface, right? You, him. Talking above the surface usually involves details like who, what, where, when, how, why. Those are fine questions when you're trying, because context is important, right? It's important to know what's going on in the relationship. How did things develop? Why did this all happen, right? These questions are fine. The problem is that when these questions are answered, the issue is that when we get stuck on the details, so after you have a discussion, you get an understanding, almost like a disclosure, right? You get this disclosure. It's like, this is what happens. I'm telling you about this slip or this acting out or this person or whoever it is. Here's all the information. Once you have the information, good. That's the framework or the context to understand what's going on. We need this stuff. The trouble, though, like I said, is when people get stuck in the details and revisit them in a way that doesn't bring resolution. So, for example, this could be 2 months later. You can bring up, like, how could you have done this to me? Or why did you do this? Even if they've already explained why they did it and they weren't in a good spot or they had pain that they just they managed it incorrectly, or maybe the answer, whatever their answer was, when we get stuck on these details, then he'll respond and say, like, well, I told you it's because of this. Or why did this happen? Well, because of this. Those questions don't bring the resolution that we want in the repair process. These are important these are important to set the stage and the context. We need this information. But then it shifts from this information to more what's underneath the surface. So what I mean by that is specifically, underneath the surface, the emotional impact, this is kind of like that figure eight, but in a different, like in the repair context. Underneath the surface, right, we feel sad, we feel not enough, not important, fear. This is the stuff we want to spend the time sharing and getting support on. Let me give you a for instance. When we ask questions, okay, I was listening to a podcast and they had a person on there describing the situation was he was running a group and he was like saying on the podcast this conversation that he had with this guy in the group. He said that the guy in the group, his wife would ask questions to her husband and say something like, hey, do you think that girl over there is attractive? And he would be in the spot of like, oh no, like, how do I answer that question? Because let's say this person was a nice looking person, and then if they're an attractive person, fine. He didn't want to say, yes, she's attractive, and then because the wife would lose it, right? I knew it. You're always looking at other women. How could you always, get caught in these details, right? These questions above the surface. So she asked this surface level question, are you attracted to this other lady here that you just don't know, but just like at a restaurant, look over, hey, do you see that lady over there? Are you attracted to her? Is she attractive? So the thing, when I was listening to him, he said, he suggested that the wife take that question and go to what he said in the interview was, she needs to process that with her group individually. She should not be coming to you with that. And so when I heard this, I'm so passionate about this. Like, I remember, like, I literally like yelled in the car. I was like, no, you don't do that. And of course, nobody's listening to me. It's just me driving by myself. But when I hear these things, I'm like, you're missing it completely, because this attachment lens helps you see through that question into truly what is underneath the surface. So it's not so much that, hey, you need to, wife, you don't talk to your husband about that. You go talk to your group about that. I'm like, that's not going to help. It's not going to do anything. You following this attachment perspective, in my mind, it's like, no, you don't do that. What you want to do is you want to ask a different question. That's not the right question. It's not, that's it. The who is, hey, are you attracted to that lady over there? That's not what we want to go for. What we want to do is, when I hear that question, when I filter that through this attachment lens, what I hear is her saying, am I enough for you? Enough for you. This is the primary question. If this question doesn't get asked, he'll never in a million years be able to sift through that, do you think she's attractive question, to get to this. Because when he hears that question, he flips into this like panicked state of, oh no, how am I going to respond to this? Because I don't want to say something. I want to be honest, but I don't want to trigger her. This person, I don't even know this person. I don't care about her, but she's asking me if she's attractive. Like, he gets flooded with his own fears because he doesn't want to make a mistake. So what I would say is, if I was working with that couple, I wouldn't suggest that she go talk to her group. What I would say is, let's get to the right question. Like, specifically, I would follow that framework that I shared last time, right? There's an event which sends a message, which creates a feeling. So the event is there's a lady there. The message that she would get is, if she is attracted, if my husband finds her attractive, the message is, I'm not enough, right? That's the feeling that I get. I feel like I'm not enough, or there's sadness when the message is that I'm not enough. So what I would say is, you take that question and say, hey, honey, when I see these other women here, I get triggered because I know that you've looked at other women, or you've been with other women, or whatever this case was. He didn't say the details of it, but I get triggered and I get scared because a part of me feels like I'm not enough. And I see this other lady over here and she's attractive, but then I just get scared that you might be looking at her and you might not find me enough or attractive. That's a completely different conversation underneath the surface when she says this to him, because now he has clarity and can respond to this, which is truly the need. The need isn't to know if this other lady's attractive or not. That doesn't do anything. The need is to know, am I enough for you? Do I measure up? Are you thinking of me? Am I a priority to you? So when you're able to get clear on what the hurt is, what's underneath the surface, that's where you're going to find a resolution, which will then avoid, you guys are then going to be able to get your need met and the reassurance that you need, that you are enough, that he sees you as important. His old behaviors sent you the message that you weren't, and he can validate that and acknowledge and own that and apologize again. Like those moments you can use, being triggered, you can actually use as a jumping off point to create even more closeness in your relationship. You might not think that's even possible, but in this framework, it's possible, because you're able to get the reassurance that you need, which helps you feel grounded and safe and loved. And he feels like he's doing good in his recovery because he's trying to be there for you anyways, but might not know how to do it. So being very clear on what's underneath the surface allows you to be able to repair. So we can use the same framework in revisiting old hurts. It's the same thing, right? 5 years ago, this is what was going on. How could you have done this? Why? The how and the why, I think, is so easy to get caught in. When it's not about that, the how and the why lead to the same question, right? The how and the why is all connected here. Because if this thing happened, I feel like I wasn't a thought. I wasn't a priority, which makes me feel like I'm not enough. This makes me feel sad or scared because I don't know what to do differently, or how can I trust you because if this is what happened, right? This how and the why stems from this underneath the surface. So what you want to do is when you're revisiting old hurts, because we need to, There's a way to do it that isn't rehashing the past and all the details, right? All the details that we rehash won't get you the resolution, but sharing underneath the surface. When I walk couples through this repair process, you start with talking about the event. She describes, let's say she, it goes both ways, but we'll say she, right? She describes the event, the emotional impact that that event had, and shares that from a vulnerable place, what's underneath the surface. When she shares it in this way, he can hear it very differently and can take that in, and then these are the steps to repair. It's him being able to acknowledge and validate he had done wrong. So for instance, he might say, I can see how when I did fill in the blank that it hurt you, and it's such a painful thing for you to have gone through. Validate, acknowledge, just take ownership. The next step is to apologize. Apologies go a long way. Third, I guess that's pretty self-explanatory. Number 3 is to be able to reassure and comfort. So such as, I want you to know that your feelings are important to me. I want you to know that I can hear what you're saying and your pain matters to me. I don't want you to have to go through this anymore. I'm working on ensuring that those old mistakes don't keep happening because I can see how much this hurts. And then number 4, it's just him reassuring you, what is he going to do to make sure it doesn't keep happening? Right? He reassures you that he doesn't want it to keep happening. And he says, number 4, this is my plan. I'm going to make sure that, by 10 p.m., my electronics are off. Because I can see how when it's midnight, slips are easier to happen. So I can see how much that hurts you, and I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is make sure that filter's on, if they're not, or, whatever I guess the details of what he says, that's just kind of according to the situation. But you're sharing the 4th point. This is what I'm going to do so it doesn't happen anymore. And so when you're doing this repair process, by being able to share the feelings underneath, he's able to respond to the feelings, which then brings this resolution of like, okay, he heard me. I feel good. I feel better. We're able to move forward now. Part of what can help in the repair process, this is maybe the last thought that I'll share for today. Part of what helps in the repair process is if he explains what was happening for him emotionally at the time. So let me give you, for instance, I was watching a training tape once from Sue Johnson, who's the developer of EFT, completely brilliant. And she was walking through this couple, the repair process. And the experience or the event was she had a miscarriage and he froze and didn't do anything. And they didn't really talk about it afterwards. And so in this whole experience, she felt completely abandoned. She felt like she wasn't a priority. She felt like he didn't care. Because on the surface, right, if you remember that figure 8, above the surface, if she just sees him being withdrawn, not talking, distant, not taking any action, it's going to send that message underneath the surface. I'm not a priority. I don't matter. He doesn't love me. I feel scared. Then in her pattern gets reactive and angry and blames and gets loud, which triggers more of his fears and insecurities. And so when Sue Johnson walked them through this repair process, she gave him space to share what was going on for you above the surface. You froze. What was happening for you underneath that? And then he went on to describe how scared he was. He was terrified because he didn't want to lose the baby and he didn't want to lose her. And so when he got in touch with how that felt, how sad it was in that moment that he didn't do anything, how much regret he had, the sense of just the pain that knowing his inaction caused her, he was able to explain all of that, which then clarified for her, it wasn't that he didn't care. He cared so much that he got paralyzed and wasn't sure how to move forward because he was scared of losing them. When he shared that back with her, that softened her view of him. Instead of, again, seeing him above the surface as uncaring, cold, distant, withdrawn, she was able to see, oh no, he cared so deeply that he just didn't know how to respond. Like it just showed up in that way above the surface. And so when he shared it like that, and then she was able to share her pain, and again, Sue Johnson walked them through this repair, that 4-step repair process that I just shared with you, there's a resolution there. Now that old fight about him not showing up in that moment doesn't happen anymore because she got a different experience, and that was able, she made sense of it in a different way, which validated how much she meant to him. Because that's really what we're going for. We want to know that we mean something to our partner. And so when these events or experiences interrupt or break our ability to believe that, we need resolution there, which happens again underneath the surface by sharing the impact that it had, and then having that being able to be clarified by our spouse and reassured. Then we get that comfort. Then those old hurts we can put on the shelf, because then it's like, yeah, that was a terrible event. That was such a painful thing that we went through. But now I feel, again, like I'm okay. I feel like that was a mistake, that my worth to him, that's the primary question. Do I matter to you? If we can then answer that question after having walked through the repair process as, yes, I do. I just dropped the ball here, or I messed up here, but you do matter to me, and I'm going to keep working to show you that you do. Then we can let those old hurts rest. And so today was just a little bit of a shorter discussion, but I think these principles you can apply in any scenario. When we repair, the goal isn't, so going back to that whole figure 8 dance of distress, hopefully you've watched these other discussions, so that makes sense. The goal isn't to avoid that, because there's no way to avoid that forever. The goal is to know what to do when we get stuck in it. And once we know what to do, we can get out of it much sooner. We get the reassurance and support that we need, because all of that just gets sparked up around those fears that were not important. And once we know how to handle those moments when they arrive, then again, that's what's sustainable about a marriage. That's how a relationship is sustained. There's literally, I don't know of any other way to have a fulfilling relationship without being able to share in this way, get a response on that level, and be able to move forward after having repaired old hurts. So again, if you guys are having difficulty doing that, all is not lost. It's just a matter of, okay, let's learn and develop that skill so we can maximize the relationship that we have. Because truly there's a deeper sense of fulfillment when we can do that. So if there's, again, any questions, I'd love to be able to support you in any way that I can. So please feel free to comment if there are questions, or send me a message. And I hope that as you've been applying these things, or as you've considered maybe trying to apply these things, I hope that you guys are starting to be able to implement them, and both of you be able to take these risks and move forward and get the benefit that you can as a result of connecting in this way. So good luck. All right, thank you. We'll talk soon.